Hey there, this is Andrew, and right now I'm going to be bringing you a review of Unfathomable in Dark Tidings. So, this is a fun one. This is the first Unfathomable review that I've done. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at their overall, what they bring to the table, and an overview of the specific cards. And again, because Dark Tidings is the first time we've seen Unfathomable, we know they'll be back in Winds of Exchange, but this really is the first set of them. Uh, it's all new stuff, and not new if you've been playing the game because you probably have used these cards, but this is certainly my first time talking through them in this way. I have played with them a ton. I have some of these that I really love, some that I've hated to play against, and yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. So let's start off with I have my 5 questions that I like to go over at the start. One of them is totally obsolete because there are no legacy cards here. Back when I reviewed Coda, of course, it didn't make sense to talk about legacy. We didn't even know that was going to be a thing. For Unfathomable and Dark Tidings, we know that there's no possibility of getting a legacy card because there just aren't old Unfathomable cards to be had. So I'll be going over the other ones. We will cover the Maverick though. All right, so the first question I like to ask is if I open up a deck in Dark Tidings, I see that it has Unfathomable. What other what other house am I looking for? I think I've been thinking about this even more in light of having listened to Help from Future Self's rehashing of Bouncing Death Quark, I think's old article or old podcasts about uh, burst main support house types. I've been thinking about that, and I actually think most of the time Unfathomable is wants to be in either the burst or support role. The control-y stuff is more on the support side, even though Deece made a very good main house, and we think about Unfathomable coming in with a lot of disruption in as a kind of a replacement for Deece in a way. But I think Unfathomable support is more of a support oriented, or it can also be a very good burst house where you set up, you have a very good Unfathomable turn, and you disrupt your opponent in ways that's going to take them turns to recover from, and meanwhile you're going to do your game plan. So anyway, that's my thoughts about that front. I don't know if I've heard. I don't remember what Help from Future Self's take was on Unfathomable in that sense. Theirs was probably better thought through than mine, but that's my thought. I think I probably have listened to it. I just don't remember what their verdict was. So anyway, with that having been said, I think of them more as a burst house actually, and so I would really like to see them with Logos because that can do a good job of setting them up for a solid burst. Logos often serves that purpose, but I think it's especially good with Unfathomable. So, all right. Um, what do I think about when I see if I sit across the table from a Dark Tidings deck that has Unfathomable in it and it's sealed? I don't know what's in the deck. What capabilities do I think might come from the fact that it is an Unfathomable Dark Tidings deck? Unfathomable. It's so hard to actually say the whole word. Anyway, what am I looking for? The first answer is board control, but Unfathomable tends to provide board control in ways that are not destruction, which is really interesting against some of against creatures with destroyed effects. So actually really nice sometimes against mass mutation where you might have a lot of destroyed steal one type effects, really annoying. Well, Unfathomable has so many ways to push those creatures off the board without actually destroying them, or just to control them in general without destroying them. So we have ways to put cards back to the hand, back onto the deck, to purge cards, to exhaust cards. It really is, it can be so frustrating the way that Unfathomable controls the board, but again, without actually destroying. So it's not even what the person is used to. Oh, okay, I understand what my creature's being destroyed. This is just frustrating. So non-destructive board control. Second thing, I expect some capture. There's some capture-based amber control in here. There's some amber loss. There is some cost boosting. They definitely have quite a few. I don't think there are any steel cards in Unfathomable. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong as we go through, but I don't think there are any steel cards. It's all capture, lose, or cost increase. And then I expect a lot of player control in here. We have a lot of cards that just mess with the other player. We have things from trying to push them into a house, messing with their deck, uh, messing with their hand, just a lot of things that are going to disrupt a game plan. And that can be especially disruptive. Even I would say, so Dees had the purge stuff abilities, which that could be really disruptive to certain combos. The unfathomable effects are they don't purge, but they can be even more disruptive toward combos just because their effects are a little bigger or sometimes more targeted. So we'll kind of cover that as we go along. But just think about it this way, right? Like, yeah, Imp Spectre will purge a card out of the opponent's hand. If you get a lucky hit, you could ruin, for a combo deck, you could just ruin the whole game. But Brain Drain uh, is targeted. You get to look at their hand and pick a card to put on top. Uh, Bornet's Touch, look at 5, purge 1 off the top of their deck. Okay. Again, you purge a card if you happen to get that. Thalassophobia, on the other hand, discard 10 cards off their deck. It's crazy. So, all that to say, now obviously the rarities are different between these, but I do think there's actually a little more the unfathomable disruption effects are a little uh, they're strong in different ways than the disruptive effects. Okay. What else? So we're looking for disruption, player control. There are some big creatures here. It's actually pretty amazing how big some of these unfathomable creatures are, and not all of them, but some of them are pretty big. And compared to like a Brobnar um, or Sanctum, you're really Unfathomable is going to be very beefy on the board comparatively, and I think that really highlights a problem with Brobnar that Brobnar isn't more hulking compared to these, a house like Unfathomable whose thematic identity is not around big creatures. Um, okay, so I really hope when they bring Brobnar back in Winds of Exchange that they feel bulky. Not armored like Sanctum, but bulky. Okay, that's a crazy tangent. So, all right, next 2 questions left because again, we're not covering Legacy. Next question is, what is my favorite in-house combo? And I think that's pretty easy for me. It's Bubbles plus Abandoned Ship. I love that. Getting to Bubbles, put a creature on top of their deck, abandon ship, put 3 creatures back in their hand, put the bubbles back in my hand, play the bubbles, put another creature on top of their deck. It's just, ugh, so gross. So yeah, I love bubbles plus abandon ship. There might be some that are stronger, but that feels so bad to push the opponent around that way. So I like it. Okay. Probably the strongest in-house combo would be like Whirlpool with Flame Gill Enforcer or Photic Raider or something like that. I mean, that's pretty good too. But that's obvious. Okay, so no legacy. So, and if I could get one Maverick in here, I would want punctuated equilibrium because getting to do all the things I just said, and then like, like with bubbles and stuff, and then just be like, oh, and by the way, your whole hand's gone. That is a really disruptive card, and it would feel good in Unfathomable with some of their other effects. Actually, you might want to put the cards back to their hand and then PE and then put a card back on top of the deck. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's gross. Just imagine doing PE and then Brain Drain. Ugh, disgusting. All right, let's get into the cards. We'll start with the commons. Again, I don't think there's any. Oh, no, there are a couple special rarity here, so those will be fun. All right, we'll start off with the commons, though. Guilt by Netcaster is a 2-power Aquan. It has 2 capture icons that it puts in your deck, and after it reaps, you exhaust a creature. That's actually a pretty strong effect. I like it. The Evil Twin version, everything's the same except that the reap effect is ready and use a friendly non-Aquan creature. So it's like the Evil Twin version is like Star Alliance, which is kind of funny. Like but ready and use is strong. I mean, obviously that is stronger than use. Um, Although there aren't house cheating play effects, so it's not like you could play an off-house creature and then use this to ready and use it. So I think the ready might be a little silly, but it's still cool. I guess if you have like 3 of these, you could ready and use the same creature 3 times. Brain Drain is a really nice control card. So it's an action with an amber. When you play it, you look at your opponent's hand, you choose a card from it, and put it on top of their deck. Obviously, that doesn't remove the card. And Thalassophobia is the Thalassophobia we'll see later, but it's a rare. So the likelihood of getting to fire this with Thalassophobia is pretty low. But still, it's a really nice effect. And there's a couple strategies with it. One is to look at what they have the most of and put one of those on top of their deck. Another is if obviously there's something that's really good in the moment, like you just bursted to 10 amber and you see they have a too much to protect, well, probably you want to put that on top of their deck, right? So yeah, there are good options there. It's a really good card. Getting to take one card from your opponent's hand and say, nope, you can't play it is strong. Flame Gill Enforcer. The art on this is so silly because he's like crying or something. I don't like. He doesn't look very enforcy. But okay. So Flame Gill Enforcer is a 6-power Aquan, and after it says that after your opponent raises the tide, you enrage Flame Gill Enforcer. It has action capture 3. So if it's not enraged, you can use that action ability to capture 3, which is capture 3 on a 6-power creature is strong. Although, play capture 3 would probably be better. But but the downside is that after your opponent raises the tide, you enrage Flame Gill Enforcer. So if your opponent really doesn't want you to be able to use this, they can just take the tide. And yeah, and cards like this and Seneschal Sargassa is another example, are interesting in that sometimes you might be in a situation where it's more to your advantage to not take the tide, right? So if you are really counting on using Flamegill Enforcer on your next turn and the tide is not high for you, sorry, and the tide is high for your opponent, you might want to leave it that way so that the next turn you will be able to use this. Because if the tide is already high for your opponent, they can't raise the tide, and they can't force this to be enraged that way. So anyway, it's an interesting thing that comes up once in a while. If you play enough Sealed Dark Tidings, you'll run into that situation almost for sure. Okay, the Evil Twin version, everything's the same except it's Action Steal 1, which Action Steal 1 on a 6-power creature is pretty good. It just has that downside about getting angry. Hookmaster is a 4-power Aquan with 1 armor. It has a fight ability and no skirmish, so it's going to take damage over time. But the fight ability is if the tide is high, your opponent loses 2 amber. That's pretty cool. It's a better version of Groke in a lot of ways. So I like that. Yeah, happy to have Hookmaster on my side. Horrid Cynan is a 4-power beast with poison. That's it. It's simple. The poison is it could take down something big. If it doesn't have taunt or anything like that or any other thing going on, then it's just not attractive for the opponent to attack. But yeah, you could use it to take out something important. The Evil Twin version is only 2 power, still has poison, but does have taunt. And I actually think that's mostly better. I think I'd rather have the Evil Twin version of this, all things considered. Photic Raider, or Photic Raider. I'm really actually not sure how to say that, and it looks like he's capturing some Star Alliance person, maybe. I'm not 100% sure there, but anyway, it's a 2-power Aquan with play capture 2, and while the tide is high, Photic Raider gets +4 power. And usually, if you're playing this against non-Dark Tidings decks, you're going to have the tide most of the time. This is going to be a big creature. Pretty cool. Also, this leads to an interesting situation if you have this with Whirlpool, which of course Whirlpool is a rare, but if you do have this with Whirlpool, you can have a situation where you play this, capture 2, do 2 damage to it. The tide is high for you, so it's fine. Then at the end of your turn, it passes over and immediately dies, uh, giving you the amber, which would be kind of cool. I've never actually pulled that off, but it seems like it would be cool. All right, Seabringer Kekoa is a 7-power beast with taunt. That is a large taunt creature. That is so big. And this not even the biggest, but this is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say that uh, Unfathomable has large creatures. And the ability Destroyed, Raise the Tide. That's pretty cool. I once I think forged a key or something by having, let's see, I had Mechabooey and something that killed a creature at the start of the turn, and I killed Seabringer Kekoa and then gained the amber from Mechabooey and Forge. That felt pretty cool at the time, but I think that was in sealed play, and I couldn't even tell you what deck that was. But that's pretty cool. Otherwise, it's just interesting. 7-power taunt is not bad just to start with, and that destroyed ability adds a little bonus if your deck cares much about that. Sink or Swim is an action that says play, choose 1. Your opponent discards a random card from their hand or exhausts a creature in each of its neighbors. Um, yeah, I would be okay having either of these with its with an Amber Pip and no choice. But actually, I find it's nice having the choice because if the opponent has no creatures on the board, and that often is the case, then you get to just discard a random card from their hand. Otherwise, exhausting 3 is pretty great. So, yeah, I'm not sad to see this card. I like it. All right, Wicolia is a 3-power beast that has Reap. Keys cost +2 during your opponent's next turn. Pretty simple. The Evil Twin version is the same, except its Reap ability instead is Exalt Wicolia. Keys cost +4 during your opponent's next turn. That's interesting, and none of that is May. So, yeah, very interesting. Also interesting, I don't see 2 heads on the normal Wicolia. Maybe, no, I really only see 1 head. But the evil twin version seems to have two heads. That's very interesting. Hmm. All right. Call of the Void is an action with a bonus amber. It says it's common, but I feel like I never get this card. But yeah, I like it. And I love the art. Looks very Lovecraftian. So it's an action with an amber. Play exhaust a creature if it was already exhausted. Destroy it instead, and its controller loses one amber. Nice. Bubbles is a 5 power Aquan. With play, put an enemy creature on top of its owner's deck. Very nice, and very appropriate that it is Saurians in those bubbles, because they're probably sitting there with their Imperial Scudam and a lot of armor, or a lot of amber, and Bubble says, nope, I'm not destroying you, I am putting you back on the deck. Give me that amber. Pretty cool. Yeah, this is a really nice disruption card. And then you're left with a 5 power creature, which is not bad. All right. Maelstrom is insane. It is an action. When you play it, you put each creature on top of its owner's deck in a random order and then gain 2 chains. So when you play this, you need to actually take all the creatures, make sure any upgrades go in the discard pile, put them face down, shuffle them up, and then put them on top of the decks. Um, yeah, very interesting. It's odd, like this, the ideal case for this card is that you are stuffing your opponent's top of deck with a bunch of slow creatures that have, that do not have play effects, and maybe you have no creatures. I would even consider, if I had, a bunch of unfathomable creatures on the board. I have not done this before, but if you had, for example, there's an action we'll see in a minute. I think it's uncommon, that says destroy each exhausted creature. I would even consider like reaping with my unfathomable creatures and then playing that to destroy them, before I did Maelstrom, if I had those two cards in my hand, because it really is nice in this case to not stuff your deck, but to stuff your opponent's deck with slow creatures. This would not be a good card to play if your opponent has a bunch of creatures with good play effects, obviously. And then you gain 2 chains, so that's a cost, but hopefully your opponent is slowed down way more than you. The fact that that's so good, I think, is a testament to the relative power in general of actions versus creatures. I think a creature probably needs a stronger ability overall than an action in order to be balanced. I guess that's obvious. All right. Portal is an action with an amber. When you play it, if the tide is high, you archive Portal. Otherwise, raise the tide. Yeah, this is a nice card. It can really be a crazy amber burst card, because if you have multiples of these, especially, you keep the tide high. You just every time you call Unfathomable, it's like 2 extra amber or something like that. It can be pretty crazy. All right. Recusals Chant is an action. Kind of crazy this isn't common, to be honest with you. It's an action with an amber. When you play it, you exhaust a creature. Okay, that's no biggie. But if the tide is high, you exhaust each creature instead. That is bonkers. Exhaust each creature. Because yours are going to ready right away. Your opponent has to take their turn and then wait. Yeah, that's pretty strong. It's equivalent to like a Skippy Time Hog, to be honest with you. No, maybe not quite, because Skippy Time Hog prevents using artifacts as well, but still, it's very good. And if you pair it with Storm Surge, it's even crazier, because Storm Surge is an action that says play your opponents cannot ready cards during the ready card step of their next turn. Wow. So if you, and they're, because these are both commons, this is not a crazy situation to get into. You can play Recusal's Chant, followed by Storm Surge, and your opponent's creatures are out of commission for 2 turns. All right, Frigorific Rod is an artifact with a bonus amber. It's an item, and it has action, exhaust a creature or artifact. That ability to exhaust an artifact is pretty cool. Yeah, this is fine. I'd much rather have this than say, uh, what's that weird guitar? Soul Fiddle? Yeah, I'd much rather have this than Soul Fiddle. Soul Fiddle doesn't even have an amber, which is a travesty. All right, going to the uncommons. We start with Abandoned Ship. This is an action with an amber. When you play it, you return a creature to its owner's hand, but if the tide is high, you return 4 creatures to their owner's hand instead. That could include your creatures, your opponents. The one interesting thing here is May does not show up anywhere on this card. So if there's only one creature on the board and it's yours, when you play this, you must return that creature to its owner's hand. If the tide is high and there are 4 creatures on the board and they're all yours, if you play this, you must return all 4 to your hand. So you do have to be careful about that, but um, I mean, it's a great card. Interesting that ship looks kind of like a shark. I don't know why. All right, Abyssal Zealot is a 4-power Aquan. It's an interesting one. It says after you raise the tide, capture 2 amber. After your opponent raises the tide, move 2 amber from Abyssal Zealot to the common supply. So it's sort of like a hey, if you take the tide while this is out, you're going to lose 2 amber, I guess. It's an interesting one. All right, Illusions of Grandeur. This is the replacement slash equivalent to Control the Weak. Illusions of Grandeur is an action with an amber. It says play, choose a card on your opponent's identity card. If your opponent does not choose that house as their active house on their next turn, gain 3 amber. So compare this to like Control the Weak is just a crazy card, right? You tell your opponent what house to play. Mark of Dees was a more toned down version of that. Um, because it had to target a creature to work. So you're having to push your opponent into a house where they at least have one creature at the point in time that you play Mark of Dees itself. Um, it occasionally could be stronger than Control the Weak because with Exile, it's possible to put your opponent in a situation where they have a creature that's not even on their house list, and then you force them into that. I mean, that really is a just they can't do anything. Illusions of Grandeur is the same house selection rules as Control the Weak. It just has to be on your opponent's card. But then it has a weaker effect because instead of just forcing them to take that house, um, you give them the option. But if they don't choose it, you gain 3 amber. Um, this would be really bad to play into a too much to protect. Like, hey, you have to pick Logos, and they go, no, I'm going to pick Shadows, push you even 3 higher amber, and then team to beat. That would be really bad. Don't do that. I have seen people kind of like make unforced errors into this card, so in that sense, you could argue that sometimes in real life it's better than a Control the Weak, but on paper it's definitely weaker. Um, because if your opponent is perfectly rational, then they can choose which is more valuable to them, giving you the 3 amber or not, and picking the house you chose, and they're gonna make a good choice. So giving them 2 options is almost certainly better than giving them only one option. That makes sense. Anyway, I think it's an interesting card. It's a fun card. I love it. I would love to see more cards like this that push your opponent into a house, but not totally coercively, because Control the Weak is probably a little too strong. Cards like this are really interesting. Okay, Echo Pearl. It's an artifact with an amber. It's an item. It has Omni destroy the Echo Pearl. You exhaust, stun, and enrage your creature. Exhaust, stun, and enrage means that creature is out of business for a long time. You might as well just destroy the creature. I mean, honestly, it's kind of silly. But if the creature is like Brend or something, I guess this is pretty good. Oh, imagine doing this to a Scowly Keeper, but we don't have Scowly Keeper in this set. Fuguru is a 1 power Aquan with poison. It says that your opponent refills their hand to 1 less card during their draw card step. Yeah, it's a weaker version of Succubus, but really interesting. The poison makes it interesting, and I'm never sad to see this card. I like cards that reduce my opponent's options. I think I'd rather have Succubus most of the time, but because the poison doesn't really increase Fuguru's staying power, and I'd really actually like that effect to stay on the board. But it's an interesting twist, and I'm happy with it. All right, Calp is a 2 power Aquan that says your opponent cannot play more than 1 card of each card type each turn. That is a really strong effect. So this is comparable to cards like Ember Imp, which, for example, says your opponent can't play more than 2 cards each turn. So this has a kind of similar impact, and I think is usually a must kill, but it's a different twist, and that's interesting, and I like it. I love this card. I'd be very happy to have this in more decks. Yeah, just solid control. And I think most decks tend to be a little heavy on creatures, so even like just the hey you can only play 1 creature a turn is a pretty strong effect. All right, there's an evil twin version, which is really weird and interesting. Uh, evil twin Calp is 7 power and says that you, the player that controls it, cannot play more than 1 card of each type each turn. That's weird. And it has Fight Reap, discard any number of cards from your hand. For each card discarded this way, deal 2 damage to an enemy creature. So I guess it's saying, hey, you compensate by getting to clear your card out with the Calp. That's interesting. I have seen this abused um, using a card like Exile, where you can push this to your opponent and suddenly they can't do things. That could be really interesting, although it's um, it's not. I don't know. It doesn't seem super reliable to me, and the decks that have it are not, in the top tier of decks. So maybe not even Exile, but Whirlpool would do it. So it's a very interesting card. Um, I don't know, like doing 2 damage to a creature, but limiting yourself in what cards you can play, I think is not a good deal. But it's an interesting card, and I'm happy, very happy to have it exist in the game. Okay, it's just interesting the power is so high when I don't think the ability is actually, well, maybe it's because the ability isn't that good that it needs to be that high, right? I don't know. All right, Kiri Guiltspine is a 3 power Aquan with Elusive that says after an enemy creature reaps, it does not ready during its controller's next ready card step. I almost never see this card in real life, but it's an interesting card. A little difficult to track, honestly. Like, oh, this creature fought, this creature reaped. That's a little tough. I don't love that. But if you can manage it, yeah, it's an interesting effect. I Making them get stunned would be better, but then I guess it wouldn't have the elusive. Yeah, Sleep with the Fishes is the action with the bonus amber that destroys each exhausted creature. That can be pretty exciting, especially when you have a ton of ways to exhaust enemy creatures. Sparkfist is a 2 power Aquan. The perspective on this art I had to really think about, but I get it. I get it. Anyway, it's a 2 power Aquan with Skirmish, and after it fights, you stun and exhaust the creature that it fights. Thundertoe is an action with an amber. When you play it, you exhaust 2 creatures, and you deal 2 damage to each exhausted creature. Oh yeah, very, very thematic, very in-house, makes sense. Do some damage. There aren't a lot of damage plinky cards in Unfathomable, actually. Okay, Tommel of the Glow. So much promise with this card, but hard to get to fire well. It's a 3-power Aquan that has Reap, exhaust a creature. If the tide is high, draw a card for each exhausted enemy creature. Theoretically, you could draw a lot of cards that way, but your opponent has to have a lot of board. This has to be ready and alive. Yeah, those two things have to be true. And it's difficult to meet both conditions. I mean, I think when this hits the board, if your opponent has a big board, they're going to prioritize killing it, but they have a big board, so killing it's easy. If they don't have a big board, then this just doesn't do much. So I think it's better on paper than in real life. But it is a cool concept, and I got really excited in the past thinking about how awesome this would be. The Evil Twin version is same stats, but the reapability here is if the tide is high, exhaust an enemy creature, and your opponent discards a random card from their hand. So essentially Toxin plus an exhaust, which yeah, that's totally fine. And that's very decent looking art. I mean, yikes. Tell me this person is not performing an annihilation ritual. Come on. Under pressure. Such an annoying upgrade. It's an upgrade with an amber. It says this creature cannot ready. Ugh. Like it just can't ready. Ugh. So bad. So frustrating. Valucanth is back from being an anomaly. It's a 6-power Aquan that says while the tide is low, Valucanth cannot be used. And it has Fight, Reap, Exhaust an enemy creature and each of its neighbors. That is a really strong ability. It's a 6-power creature. That's pretty intense. Um, it's a great card. Yeah. Unfortunately, an uncommon. Okay, Wrath or Ruin. Also great art here. Is an action, no amber on this one. It gives you a choice to either destroy a flank creature or return 2 enemy creatures to their owner's hands. That's an interesting choice. Neither is as, it's like neither of these is as good as certain like comparable cards that have an amber pip, I think. Um, so I think this card is actually a little underpowered, but yeah, it's an uh, interesting choice and cool art, so we'll forgive it. Gephos is a 3-power beast that has hazardous 4, and if it's destroyed, if the tide is high, you archive it. I mean, it's fine. I guess I would like to have this enhanced, but otherwise it's kind of just fine. Tidal Wave is an action with an amber. When you play it, if the tide is high, you destroy a creature and each of its neighbors, and then your opponent raises the tide. This is one of very few cards that can force your opponent to raise the tide, so that's interesting. And destroy a creature and each of its neighbors is not bad. Yeah, it's a really interesting card. Okay, Drawn Down is a rare. It's the first rare we've seen so far in Unfathomable, and it's going to come actually with 2 uh, special rarity cards that are tied to it. So uh, it's a 3-card combo, auto include combo, and here's how it works. So you play Drawn Down. That's the first card in the combo. When you play it, you look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. You discard 1, put 1 on the bottom of their deck, and 1 on the top of their deck. If you have all 3 cards of this combo in your hand, then almost certainly what you would like to do is remember the card that you put on the bottom of their deck and put a card on top of their deck that matches the house of a creature on their board. So, ideally, you put a card on top of their deck that matches the house of a creature on their board. You remember the card you put on bottom. Who cares about the one you discarded? Then, dive deep says discard the top card of your opponent's deck. Put a creature that shares a house with that card on the bottom of its owner's deck. So obviously, if that card does not match house with a creature on the that is on the board, then this fizzles. So that's why uh, playing drawn down first is very helpful. But if you do both successfully and successively, then you have now placed, you've looked at the top three cards of the deck, you put one of those on the bottom, and then with Dive Deep, you put another card on bottom. Now you have placed two cards on the bottom of your opponent's deck. You know what those cards are, and you play Dark Discovery. It's an action. You get an amber, and you name two cards. You discard the bottom two cards of your opponent's deck. If they are the named cards, then you purge Dark Discovery and forge a key at no cost, which is very good. So, and no is different from zero because no can't be added to. If there's a +3 cost or whatever, no cost doesn't care about that. So yeah, so if you can pull these three off in order, you're pretty much guaranteed to forge a key with Dark Discovery, as long as your opponent has at least a creature on the board and has a card that matches house with it in the top three cards of their deck. But it's hard to get all three of these cards in your hand at the same time. That's pretty lucky. That's why I would like to have some Logos Archive with this to be able to more reliably pull that off. All right, on to the other rares. Corrode is very good. Um, yeah, I like Corrode. Corrode is an action with an amber. Play choose one, destroy an artifact. This is really good because if your opponent has an artifact you want to destroy, great, you destroy it. Otherwise, just choose one of the other options. Um, so it's like even better than a card that would just destroy an artifact, because even if your opponent doesn't have an artifact deck, it's still good. So you either destroy an artifact, destroy an upgrade, or destroy a creature with armor. So yeah, I really like Corrode. And there's some poor Sanctum creature getting corroded, I guess. All right, Effigy of Melaruk is an artifact and item. It says that after an enemy creature reaps, you put an awakening counter on Effigy of Melaruk. And if there are 6 or more awakening counters on Effigy of Melaruk, move it to a flank of your battle line as a creature with 100 power and 100 armor. Its text box is considered blank. Um, oof, that's crazy. A creature with 100 power and 100 armor. But you have to get this out there and then have your opponent reap 6 times and then hope that it's relevant enough to have a big body. And then your opponent can just, you know, implosion and it's dead. So yeah, this is an interesting card. I don't think it's very good. All right, moving on. Early on, I remember people were like, "You could have this and Waste Not, and you would draw your whole deck." Great, but will it help you win? I'm not sure. Flash Freeze is an action with an amber. Play for the remainder of the turn. After you play another card, exhaust a creature. That's a cool effect. I like that. General Sherman, very interesting. 10 power beast, deals no damage when fighting. When you play it, you purge each other creature. And it doesn't say to do this, but I usually put them under General Sherman because if General Sherman leaves play, you return to play each creature purged this way, exhausted and under its owner's control. Um, so it helps to keep track of, oh, they were purged this way. Theoretically, I guess if you have a universal recycling bin, you can return a creature from under Sherman to your archives, and then Sherman would lose track of it because that's a secret area, and so it wouldn't be able to return that creature to play when it gets destroyed. I think that's how that would work. Yeah, but that's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's a fun card. Mm, All right, Kilagog's Trench. This is a fun one. It's an artifact. It's a location. It says at the end of your turn, place one depth counter on Kilagog's Trench. Then destroy each creature with power equal to the number of depth counters on Kilagog's Trench. So the turn you play it, it's going to destroy all power 1 creatures. The next turn, it's going to destroy all power 2 creatures. Next turn, power 3, etc. The interesting thing about this is, like, on the turn it destroys power 3 creatures, it doesn't touch power 2 and 1. It's just the power 3. Next turn 4, but it leaves alone 1, 2, 3. So, yeah, really interesting. Creates a fun puzzle to play around. Lack Gaboon is a 3-power Aquan that gets +1 power for each other exhausted creature. If there are 3 or more other exhausted creatures, then it gets Skirmish and Hazardous 5. Interesting. I'm really not sure it's game changing. No, I don't think it is. But it's an interesting card. Portal Monger is a lot more interesting, actually. From a winning the game perspective, anyway. It's a 4-power Aquan that says while the tide is high, your opponent's keys cost +4. That's pretty strong if you can protect it, especially. Rust Miser is a 5-power beast that says reap exhausts each enemy artifact. That is cool. That's a lot of artifact control, although it only exhausts. It doesn't destroy them or anything like that. But yeah, pretty interesting. Sobob's Thingamabob is it's an artifact. It has an amber. It's an item. And it says, after your opponent forges a key, exhaust each creature they control. Also very interesting, especially because that would happen at the start of their turn. So when they forge, they're then going to have a bad time immediately after, which is kind of cool. Slows them down. Tawiki Kraken is a 12-power beast that's very large. And no, it does not interplay stunned. It just comes in exhausted like normal. When you play it, though, you exhaust 2 friendly Unfathomable creatures. If you do not, you destroy Tawiki Kraken. Okay, that's a little tough. And after it fights or reaps, you deal 2 damage to a creature with 2 splash. So that's pretty strong. Not crazy strong, though. I actually feel like for the high cost to get it on the board, it probably ought to have, like, gain 1 amber and deal 2 to a creature with 2 splash, but maybe not. Make it more like Leafy Dragon. Thalassophobia, I mentioned before. It's an action with an amber. When you play it, you discard the top 10 cards of your opponent's deck. Some decks just won't care. If a deck just has a lot of good cards, it's not going to care because it'll cycle back to more good cards. But if it's a combo deck, you could hit something really frustrating. So that's cool. I like it. The Chosen One, very fun. It's a 9-power Aquan. It says, instead of readying creatures they control during their ready card step, your opponent deals 1 damage to the Chosen One for each exhausted creature they control. So, so if your opponent has, 10 creatures, or, reefs with 3 creatures, instead of them readying at the end of their turn, the Chosen One would take 3 damage and the creatures stay exhausted. If you can, by the way, if you can ward this thing, then, no matter how many creatures they're trying to unexhaust, the ward will swallow that whole damage burst. Yeah, pretty cool. It's a nice creature. I like it. All right, the Susurrus is an artifact. It's a ship, and it says action exhausts a friendly unfathomable creature. If you do, exhaust up to 3 creatures and/or artifacts. I think that's a pretty good trade. I like it. I like this card. The Voice of Recusal is a 5-power Aquan with 1 armor. It says while the tide is high, each friendly creature gets +1 power and +1 armor. But while the tide is low, each enemy creature gets +1 power and +1 armor. That's interesting. I'm not sure what's happening thematically there, but yeah, it's an interesting card. Kind of fill in a similar role to, like, Abon the Armor Smith, but serious downside if your opponent takes the tide. All right, Whirlpool. This is a really game warping artifact. It has an amber on it. and it's a location. It says at the end of each player's turn, that player gives control of the creature on their right flank to their opponent and moves it to that player's left flank. So creatures are swirling around in an anti-clockwise direction. Very interesting. And yeah, if you can work this out with some capture, it's a good way to steal actually, because you capture onto your creature, hand it over to them, but be aware your opponent might do this a similar thing to you. So yeah, very, very weird and interesting card. Cup of Water is an action with an amber. When you play it, you stun each cyborg creature and each robot creature. Cool. Yeah, it's interesting. Deep Priest Glebe is a 5-power Aquan that says after you play an Aquan creature, exhaust an enemy creature. Yeah, that's a nice effect. I like that one. Very nice. Okay, Omnipus is a weird one. It's an 8-power beast. It can't fight. All right, but when you so the key thing here to understand though is that Omnipus comes with at least, I think, at least 3 tentaclids and up to like 5. I actually don't know the number. But you get you get some tentaclids. So tentaclid is a 3-power arm with skirmish and taunt that can't reap, but it can fight pretty good, with the skirmish. So that's pretty cool. And the Omnipus, when it reaps, you gain 1 amber for each friendly tentaclid. So the goal is you have the Omnipus surrounded by the tentaclids. The tentaclids are protecting the Omnipus and doing fighting. And when the Omnipus reaps, the more tentaclids it has protecting it, the more amber it gets. So they're very synergistic that way. When you play Omnipus, you discard the top 8 cards of your deck, and you play and then you play each tentaclid from your discard pile one at a time. So even if all your tentaclids are discarded and you get none in the top 8 cards of your deck, you still play the ones from your discard pile, which is pretty cool. So this is a fun card. I haven't seen this be great, but it is certainly fun. Oh, at least 2 copies of Tentaclid, I guess. And then maybe it's 2 to 5. You can't get Tentaclid without Omnipus, though. All right, Taniwa is an 8-power beast with 2 armor. That's, again, very big here, right? It has Fight, Reap, destroy a friendly creature, and gain 1 amber. That's pretty cool. Destroy a friendly creature and gain an amber. I guess you would prefer, though, to get this with creatures that have good destroyed abilities. The Evil Twin version is much smaller, 4 power with only 1 armor, so half the power, half the armor. Still a beast, and it has Fight, Reap. Put a creature from your discard pile on top of, on top of your deck. That's cool. Um, Yeah, I like the old Patty quote. The last time I hooked it, I only wished it had gotten away. But yeah, it's a cool creature, cool effect. Put a creature from your discard pile on top of your deck. I do feel like, I mean, that's equivalent to like World Tree, but you're reaping, so you get the amber, I guess. Yeah, it's fine. All right, that's it. That's all the Unfathomable creatures or cards. Um, really excited to see how they change in the next set whenever that comes out. Um, they really add a nice, different flavor and twist to the game, and yeah, looking forward to seeing where they go next. But that was Unfathomable and Dark Tidings. I hope you enjoyed and that you will get out there and forge some keys.